Greetings, fellow Gorehounds, and welcome back to a Blood Splattered vlog. I'm the Horror Guru.
And I'm Count Jackula.
And today we're going to talk about Stop Motion, a psychological horror film by director Robert Morgan, who is a stop-motion animator himself. And Jack has stopped motioning, apparently. The movie follows a woman who is a stop-motion animating apprentice, I guess you would call her. And she is apprenticing under her mother, who is apparently this stop-motion guru that everyone
stop-motion master.
Everyone in the fucking business knows her and knows her work. And she's apparently done a bunch of movies that were just straight-up movies she made on her own.
But the mom is like obviously suffering from something like Parkinson's, where like her hands don't work very well. Her
ability to use her hands is dead, and she's obviously not in the best of health, and she's extremely controlling and overbearing.
She treats her daughter like a stop motion puppet.
Yep. And what ultimately ends up happening is the mother dies suddenly. The daughter ends up having to deal with the grief of that and also decides to finish her mother's movie. But over the course of this film, that project ends up taking a life of its own and evolving into her own unique project that ends up exploring her own personal trauma and grief, I guess you could call it. I don't know what you would call it, because it doesn't feel like she's grieving her mother so much as dealing with shit that happened to her in the past.
Yeah.
That her mother never dealt with.
Yeah. In many ways, it has that same sort of like through line as Beau is Not Afraid, even though this is not a comedy.
It is a trauma odyssey.
Yeah, it's a trauma odyssey.
But it is one done with a lot of stop motion animation, because the lines between her real world experience and the movie she's making start to blur together. It starts off small with like her having nightmares of the project she's working on, and she's inside the project. And then eventually it starts happening in her waking life. She creates a project about this little girl in the woods that's being chased by this entity, and that entity starts to chase her in real life.
Yeah.
And you're not quite sure if there's like a real thing there or if it's entirely in her head, but you know either way, it's all a metaphor for her trauma and warning child abuse that she experienced growing up.
Yeah. One of the things that happens is she runs into this little girl. Like the minute she came on, I was like, the child within has come to haunt the grown-up. You know? And that is absolutely what it is.
Oh yeah. This little girl obviously like is representing her inner child.
Yeah.
One way or another. And the little girl ends up like guiding some of the choices she makes on her project, because the little girl kind of reminds her that like, wait, why are you doing what your mom wants you to do? What do you want to do? What is this project supposed to be? Which is very helpful for her, because up until that point, she's been dealing with either her mom telling her what to do, or her boyfriend telling her what to do, or her boyfriend's sister telling her what to do.
Oh, the boyfriend's sister. Oh, holy shit.
Queen bitch, the boyfriend's sister.
Holy crap.
I'll get into more about her in the spoiler section, because there's some shit she does in the later half of this movie that kind of like become the last straws for the main character.
Yeah.
Needless to say, the main character ends up going on a murder spree by the end of this movie, but like how that happens, I'll talk about that in the spoiler section.
Yeah.
This is a movie about a character who really didn't stand a chance because of the environment around her and how she was raised.
Yeah.
Now that her mom is gone, she's confronting all that through her art, but she's also starting to like succumb to what seems to be madness that her mom seems to have also experienced in her later days.
Yes.
It's very clear that her mom's line between reality was kind of blurry towards the end there.
Yeah.
And so she might have inherited some of that going on in this movie.
And I like the way the movie introduces it. It doesn't take too long to get to, oh, okay, mom's a fucking abusive bitch.
Oh, God. Like, they do it so subtly at first, and then they just fucking hit you in the face with it.
Yeah, because in the beginning you're like, well, she's being very controlling, but that's what a director does. Yeah. That's what they have to do.
At first, it's just she's directing her in the project they're making, and so you're like, okay, like being a little forceful there makes sense. But then it starts to like creep into their normal life, like just making cereal.
Yeah.
Shit like that.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, no, you're trying to control. You do this so well because you have this traumatic need to control everything, which is abusive.
Which is partially why the main character starts to lose her mind when her mom's gone because it's very obvious her mom directed her whole life.
Yeah.
And now that she's out on her own, left to her own devices, she has no idea what to do with herself.
Yeah. All she has is the inner child to guide her.
She's now a scared girl in the woods, and there's a scary thing outside.
Yeah, which is the everything.
The everything.
You know, like, yeah.
She can't handle it because she's not equipped to, because the mom never raised her for it.
Right, yeah, she's not been raised to actually, like, have confidence in what she's doing. And
the people around her aren't helping. Like, the boyfriend tries, but then some of the people around the boyfriend are just terrible people that undermine anything the boyfriend's trying to do.
Yeah. It was interesting because it straddled the line between, like, is the boyfriend a piece of shit or is this relationship just bad?
The relationship's bad.
The relationship is definitely bad.
But the boyfriend's sister is absolutely a piece of shit.
Oh, yeah.
I got the impression the boyfriend is trying to be a good boyfriend.
Yeah, he's just not succeeding.
But he's blind to how shitty his sister is. He's blind to how shitty his circle of people are.
Yeah, and he doesn't understand the girlfriend's trauma.
No.
Main character's
does
trauma.
not understand what she's going through at all, and also doesn't seem to understand her as an artist either.
No.
Now, granted, she's doing some fucked up shit. Like, her stop motion puppets, like, at one point in the movie, start getting made out of rotting animal flesh, roadkill and shit. And it's like, okay, we're gonna make the puppets out of that because it's more raw and real, and it's a better self-expression of how I feel on the inside.
Yeah, because, like, she is kind of wandering around, like, you know, like a zombie, like, or the undead.
Yeah,
you know?
She is slowly rotting.
Yeah.
This is not a movie for the faint of heart. It gets gruesome. Even before we get to the murder portion of the movie, we're already dealing with, like, rotting flesh on puppets.
It's like she's constantly working on a Tool video.
Well, yeah,
like,
absolutely. It 100% feels like a Tool or a Nine Inch Nails video.
Yeah, you half expecting, like, prison sex to start playing, you know?
There's, like, some subtle references to those music videos, though, because some of the people she interacts with in the midpoint of the movie are people who make music videos like that.
Yeah.
And she even tries to get a job with one of them, and it goes sour for reasons we'll talk about in the spoiler section. She tries to get the job and do the normal thing and try to do the life, but then everything shits on her, and she was not prepared for that level of awfulness because her whole life had been controlled up to that point.
Yeah, yeah. She is a little girl who's having to face these things for the first time,
Absolutely.
even though she's, like, probably closing in on her 40s.
Well, yeah, she is not a child.
Yeah.
But internally she is.
Yeah.
And her art reflects that.
Very much.
Different kinds of horror in this movie. You get the creepy body horror of the actual stop motion segments. You get the spooky, almost supernatural ghost horror when the entity starts chasing her in her own, like, dreams and apartments.
Yeah.
And then you also just get slasher horror by the end of the movie when she goes on her murder spree.
Yes.
You get the whole package with this movie. The movie this actually reminds me of the most, weirdly enough, is Censor.
Yes. Yeah.
Both movies are about characters slowly, like, losing the line between reality and fiction, but one is a censor who's losing their mind because in their own life they're, like, cutting out all the bad parts.
Yeah.
And one is an artist who is losing their mind because the line between their art and their reality is starting to blend together.
Yeah. It's really, 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 really good. Right before this movie came out, like, there was a lot of anticipation in the horror community about it, and no, it absolutely deserved it.
This is a great example of a movie that completely lives up to all of its anticipation.
Yeah.
You know, everyone who saw it said it was really good, and it is really good. I highly recommend it. It's currently available to rent on various platforms. I highly recommend you do if anything we've said so far has enticed you, because this movie, it deserves more support, and I fucking love it.
Yeah, it's also all about being an artist.
Yes. Much like the other movie we talked about earlier this week, Destroy All Neighbors. This one's about being an artist, but from a much darker, much more personal point of view.
Much less funny.
Much less funny.
Because, well, we'll talk about it in the spoilers.
Yeah, we will.
We'll talk about it in the spoilers.
And speaking of the spoilers, here are the spoilers.
Yeah, so she starts eventually murdering people in order to get the materials to make the puppets.
Yeah, because eventually she graduates from dead animal flesh to dead human flesh.
Yeah.
This is kind of spurred on as her life gets progressively worse. Her boyfriend gets his sister to hire her at her animation company, where they obviously do like music videos for bands like Tool and Nine Inch Nails. But when she gets there, even though she's an accomplished animator who's been working under her mom, who's a fucking legend in this industry.
Yeah. And most importantly, she is the one that animated the last few films of her mother.
Yeah.
Like, she's the one who's actually
because her mom couldn't, because she didn't have function in her hands.
She's given the interns work.
Yeah.
And you're like, isn't that a real waste of her talents?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also not what she was promised.
No.
Now, that alone is not enough to completely ruin your existence. It's still a living to do that.
Yeah, she's still getting paid.
However, there is a kick in the teeth that happens while she's working at this place when she is observing some of the projects they're working on. And one of the projects in particular looks strikingly similar to her own movie that she's making back in her apartment.
Yeah.
The one with the little girl trapped in the woods and the entity outside trying to get in. And she realizes really quickly her boyfriend's sister stole her project.
Yeah, and gave it a happy ending.
Absolutely. And completely cut her out of the process, even though she fucking hired her to work at this fucking studio.
Yeah.
She could have hired her to make that fucking thing.
Yes. Yeah.
If that's what they were working on anyway.
Yeah, but she wanted to steal the credit.
Yep. And this is the moment where a character who has been scared of a thing their entire lives go to confront the thing, and then worst case scenario happens.
Yeah.
And so at this point, the character is in a permanent downward spiral for the rest of the movie, ultimately culminating in them killing their boyfriend, killing their boyfriend's sister, and also takes bits of their own flesh to create the puppets to like finish their project.
Yeah, it's a bit May-like.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. And the line between their project and reality completely merges at this point.
Yeah, because at that point, like, the monster is stalking her throughout the studio. Yep. The very last thing that happens is she crawls back into the house that's on the little stop-motion set, and the girl that she's been talking to the entire time is watching the finished film on the laptop as she's putting herself in this steamer trunk.
Yeah, it's fucking weird.
Yeah, and the little girl goes, "I love it." And then the main character kind of smiles and then shuts and locks themselves in the box, and that's the end.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of ways to interpret this.
There's a lot. Also, before we even get into the interpretations of this, it's also pretty much confirmed by the end of the movie. Little girl doesn't actually exist. It is 100% her inner child.
Yeah.
It is her as a child.
Yes. One interpretation is that it is a complete tragedy. She has just completely locked herself away with no one.
She has succumbed to the isolation.
Mm-hmm. However, I don't think that's the most likely interpretation.
All right.
Because the child is still in that
True.
house.
The inner child is still allowed to run free.
Yeah, the inner child is still allowed to run free. So another interpretation is that the main character is basically the traumatized adult.
And they're locking that away. That makes sense.
Yeah. If you take that interpretation, it ends on a much more hopeful note, but it's still very ambiguous. They don't quite become the master of two worlds, or at least we don't watch that happen.
It's more like they become the master of one world.
Yeah, they become the master of
the one they've
world.
Been trying to master.
Yeah, they mastered that and
given up completely on the other world.
Yeah, given up on this other one.
And that's the part where it almost feels like a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
Because like in a hero story, you master both.
Right, but maybe that's the job of the inner child.
True, yeah.
You know, the inner child is the one who is supposed to actually deal with the art and learn to deal with the outside world.
Makes sense, yeah.
You know, but instead of taking the position of essentially the main character who truly transforms, we're taking the perspective of one of the psychodramatic manifestations of the trauma itself and watching that journey.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
She heals herself and gives herself life.
Yeah,
you know,
makes sense.
But there's also the sacrificial part of it. Taking flesh from herself and things.
The obvious metaphor of her peeling her own flesh and putting it into the art, it's like it's taking out a part of herself.
That's super obvious, you know?
And then eventually she becomes it.
And then eventually she becomes the art. Yeah, Yeah, that's the other part of it. She
Yeah.
ultimately becomes the art itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, which...
The line between her and the art, there is no line anymore. It's completely...
And it's something that I think a lot of artists can identify with in every interpretation, which is, oh, okay, you've become the art. Oh, but there's actually this creative part of you that still lives on, does other things.
It's true, yeah.
Oh, I've shut myself away in this little thing and just succumb to the trauma, but you know, that kid is still there.
Yeah.
You know, like the kid who wanted to make things is still there. And, you know.
And it's the ultimate artistic expression too, because it's not something that she's done for anyone other than herself.
Right. Just for her. Other people could have seen it, but
there's a certain point in which she kind of gives up on that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
she gives up on that because, like, she doesn't know how to deal with, like, that level of fucking creative betrayal.
Damn.
Yeah,
This movie's deep as fuck. Stop Motion is a really fucking good movie, if you can't tell by how much we had to say about it here. I highly recommend you check it out. And where can they find you, Count Jackula?
Oh, well, first of all, you can find me on YouTube. I stream on YouTube every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at about 7 p.m. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I stream on Twitch. Tuesdays and Thursdays are specifically playing video game streams.
Y'all know me, I'm the Horror Guru. You can find me at the Horror Guru on Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram, wherever. Just look up the Horror Guru or Blood Splattered Cinema and I'll be there. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And if you'd like to help out either of us more directly, be sure to check out our Patreon pages. And remember, if you decide to go the Patreon route, even $1 a month can go a long way. And if you made it this far into the video, then I want you to comment below, and be sure to comment below using the hashtag #MeatPuppet. Use the hashtag #MeatPuppet, that way I know, that way Jack knows, that way the whole world knows that you like meat puppets. How you like that?